Obviously, the Australian Medical Association, they're probably not schmucks either.
Well, there's other stuff that comes out of Australia that says the opposite. But first of all, when you're making a psychological diagnosis, when you make a medical diagnosis, you rule out. When you make a psychological diagnosis, you rule in. When you're making a medical diagnosis, the patient has every disease imaginable until you can rule it out. When you're making a psychological diagnosis, the patient has no disease until you can rule it in, whether it's wind turbine syndrome, if you think that's, or somatic, whatever, you rule, and it has to meet a certain number of qualifications for some of those syndromes. And they're not, you don't say that person has it until you ruled it in. And so when you design a study,
there are several studies.
Right, but the thing is
so when you design a study to test a hypothesis, it depends on whether you're talking about a physiological disorder or a psychological
right,
disorder.
but this is the thing.
On how you set it up.
We could set up if we followed your line of reasoning down and didn't want to have anything at all going on because somebody might be upset by something. I mean, there's people who don't like. You know, there's people who who PTSD and things like that, who every time they see a heavy truck coming, that ramps them up. I mean, we could go on and on.
Well, what I'm saying is that I have come, the Shirley, Wisconsin study was the only one that was designed not to prove or disprove.
Right, no, we actually think that the Shirley study was a pretty interesting study. We've actually all looked at the Shirley study.
And
It's more balanced than most studies. It definitely makes this study look pretty bad in terms of how it's done.
It's an instigator for trying to do more research.
But, you know, just to bring us back to where Stephanie's comments, which are on Marcel, we agree that there's health issues up there. In fact, the original sound consultant, which happened to be RSE, told the developer that they were going to have problems at those distances. And what happened was he was replaced when he said that. He was fired. And they brought in another consultant that basically put those homes, most of those homes that are in complaining side are on the Canadian side of the mountain, which is the east side, which is very, very rural, lightly developed. Bruce and I were up there last Friday, and we were there on that mountain road for an hour and a half, 2 hours. One vehicle went by the whole time we were there. A pickup truck came by. So it was very quiet other than the chainsaw that was running while we were there.
And another thing that hasn't been done is identify just which houses there are, because there are a bunch at the north end, which are way closer.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the majority of the people that he has in his study are from that north end, where some of them are only about 1,000, 1,200 feet.
Well, more importantly, I think we the board agree the Mars Hill situation was a horrible placement of those turbines.
So this one is a study by, or not really a study, it's just like a news article by Stephen Ambrose and Rob Rand.
Is this the Falmouth one?
No.
This one is just one in the Windwise in Massachusetts in their article, in their journal down there. And anyway, they have kind of an interesting chart here, and I don't know if it's going to be big enough to really get a good glimpse of it.
I don't think you can blow it up anymore.
But basically, you know, they're showing, you know, this sort of complaint chart, you know, as far as where the decibel values are, you know, and they're showing if you're down, you know, into this 30, you know, sort of seemingly like the mid 30 range, you know, for what you can calculate, because clearly you're not going to be able to measure some of this stuff because your ambient is going to be pretty comparable to it. You know, so it's all these numbers, calculated numbers, you know, that there either are few or no complaints down in this area. So, you know, in areas where the calculations would demonstrate that you're down there, you're not likely to get complaints. So actually, there's no structures currently, on the current project that are actually in even this range. Everybody is in the no complaint range is currently living on this particular project. Now, I know there were structures were put up after the fact, for an example, you know, I don't know what they would be for that. Now, I know there's a Danish study that was done, and one of the things that they're talking about is, you know, something in the mid-20s for decibel calculations again, because they can't measure it in houses, because obviously over there in that part of the world, there's a lot denser population than we have around here. But that's what they're looking at, and they call that their rural area. So I mean, they do calculations to kind of enforce that. But I mean, I just in pointing out that in these areas where you are down this low, I mean, if we can get areas that are protected at this level, we theoretically, according to this chart, we wouldn't be getting any complaints, in theory.
The other thing about a lot of those sound standards in Europe, I can't remember, I think it's the Danish one, that is a yearly sound average. So what they're counting on is that the parts of the year it will be quiet, and for other parts of the year it will be much noisier, and too bad, because they average it over the whole year.
Yeah, I didn't think I was closing that one. That's a nice picture.
Where's all the white stuff?
Yeah, this doesn't look like. Shoot. You need to get Firefox on here where you can just say restores.
Yeah, good.
I like
I know how to do it. I just want to get back to just don't worry about it tonight. If you could just set this up for like regular normal windows, like get that IT guy to do it, it would be great, because I just really
There's
don't
a
like
simple
this layout.
setting supposedly somewhere there that just tells it to work like Windows 7.
That would be awesome. And then there was the other report here from
It's up.
Yeah, that's one.
And then there's the all right. I think this is in that same series of articles, but I'm not positive. And basically, this one, they talked about,
So look, read that bottom paragraph.
so this one right here says, this is actually somewhat interesting, because it basically says that if you go 5 decibels above whatever it was before, that you don't get any response to sporadic complaints. If you increase by 10 decibels for whatever it was before, you get a lot of complaints. And if you go with 15 decibels above whatever it was before you started, it's a big deal. You're in court.
And it's basically, I got it from a different, pretty much the exact same thing, but it wasn't this exact article. That's why the recommendation being put in is 5 dB over the existing level.
Which makes it extremely, extremely important to have trustworthy ambient sound measurement.
Well, right, that's the goal of anything, whether it's stormwater, sound, or whatever you're doing. You want to have whatever you want to have, your soils, whatever it is. Everything you do before you start needs to be accurate on any project.
What I like about Ranch, just because of my own
This is your left hand.
interest, was that, you guys used to, like, he's not a sound consultant, What he is, I've read some of the other things he's written about, and one thing that he grabbed me is that he talks about the plastic brain, and I did a research paper on the plasticity of the brain. He is looking more at what you guys are going to say are sensitive receptors. He's looking at people. They are the sensitive receptors, whereas a lot of the other sound consultants are looking at the turbine. How much sound does it put out? Measuring with a machine. Like I said to Mike Smith when you guys started this, the most sensitive instrument there is the human auditory system, the vestibular system. a
Yeah,
human
but you
brain
could
is
get
more,
10 people standing side by side and everyone would hear something different. So the one person that hears it, do you adjust everything to the one, or?
well, it depends on whether you're making that person acutely ill or not, I guess.
But the problem is, that that's where you get to it, because all occurrences of what you call acute illness occur over certain levels,
Over certain what?
over certain sound levels.
That's why.
For
And
instance,
for example, what
Oh, you
sound
know
level?
what? You're right.
Even
Got
salt
it.
says that you can't pick up anything under 60 dB, even in
Thanks.
infrasound.
Isn't
That's
rain
his
the one in
goal.
the Wisconsin study that was able to hear turbines from 7 miles away?
Well, I don't know if it was 7, but Rand could pick up he knew when they were running and when they weren't from several miles away.
Yeah, the only thing about that is, there has not yet been one double-blind study done on that.
That's why I'm concerned that you guys don't base something on something that you think is scientific when there isn't scientific proof.
Well, there was no scientific proof when they first made microwaves. Should they not have made microwaves?
We don't vote on whether something is scientific or not. We vote on whether it's in our own best interest or not.
That's a good discussion. So
God help us on this one.
this particular one is Montville had came up with their with what they're doing. It's kind of like what I'd like for us to actually ultimately have, you know, when we do our sound part, so it can be referenced, because one of the things I do think is difficult when you look through the ordinance, which, you know, I don't necessarily agree with how they came to their conclusion, but stylistically they actually cited all the things that they cited to come up with what they did. So it makes it easier to trace back into how you got to a conclusion. And because there is so much information out there or whatever, it'd be nice to have some way of describing exactly how we arrive at these different conclusions so everybody can read it. So, I mean, I do like that
Yeah, I think we should actually write up one of these. It's just,
that aspect of it. So like I said, I mean, so, and they talked about this, the Marsh Hill thing. I mean, they went
hey,
through.
whoa, let's take a look at, just to give you an idea of how, quite frankly, these people, I'll put it plainly, these people couldn't tell the difference between science and voodoo that wrote this.
Which people are those groups?
Just keep to the technical facts, okay?
Technical facts,
The
and if
people
you
who
look
wrote
at,
this, is that what you're saying?
Just we don't want to have an art. I want
Yeah.
Bruce to keep the technical facts. Paul will let Bruce talk technically.
well, I spent hours and hours looking up all these different things down through here, and it's like, let's see, vibroacoustic disease is exactly, 2 scientists that have written 37 to 39 papers, I think it is, on vibroacoustic disease. The entire concept is based on mostly either aircraft mechanics exposed to sound levels of 130 to 150 decibels for hours at a time, and pilots and what do they call them? They don't call them stewardesses anymore, but
Flight attendants.
flight attendants who have been exposed. You wouldn't believe the level
If
of
you ever,
infrasound in planes. On top of that, these same 2 people, all of the papers you look up on vibroacoustic disease, almost all of them reference themselves. There's almost no other work being done on it, and almost no one recognizes it as a problem other than with these extreme high levels for long periods of exposure.
are you, well,
Okay, that's that one. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity. I love this one.
well, you can poo-poo all you want, you
Yeah, why
know?
don't you scroll down to some of the recommended setbacks? That's
Yep.
what I wanted to highlight in this article, was the recommended
Right.
setbacks.
Okay, now the
If
next
you go
one,
to
the next
any-
one I'll point out though is, for instance, these people
Just
did
be quick.
the letter by Phil Bloomstein, good letter, he's 1,000 feet away. So, then the
That
Mars
doesn't
Hill
make
one,
it-
it
That doesn't
says,
make what he says totally irrelevant.
it does in our case for our ordinance.
We agree you shouldn't be 1,000 feet away.
Well,
Yeah, Have we even suggested we should put them 1,000 feet away from anyone?
In Vinyl Haven, look at that, at 1.5 miles away from the project, people are complaining.
Well, take a look first at the Mars Hill one. At the time of this writing, there are no residences in Mars Hill between distances of 3,500 feet and 1.25 miles. I Google mapped 29 residences at that distance, and they've been there since before the turbines were built. In other words, I don't know who told them this, but they obviously didn't check. Families up to 1.5 miles, you know, that's, yes, some people are going to be,
How many people complain, how many are at 1.5 miles on Vinyl Haven complain?
Well, that's just
Anybody
it, there's
know?
no
I don't
numbers,
know.
there's no nothing.
I think it would be good to know, like, you know, what percentage of that 1.5 miles
So,
are registered complaints. And the other thing is what's the calculated sound? You know, it's kind of a big thing because, you know, quite a bit of the reading I've done actually corroborated that RAND report, that one that Stephanie said, that showed basically showed the complaint diagram for a number of complaints per calculated decibels. Okay, and actually the Danish study basically supported that. You probably didn't know about the Danish study, but the Danish study was somewhat similar in its findings. So it's kind of interesting, you know, that those kind of, you know, intertwined a little bit. So, I mean, to me, it's telling me that the sound is an issue, and the distance, you know, this focus on distance really isn't necessarily where we should be putting our energy. You know, our energy should be making sure that the sound is down low enough that it doesn't cause problems.
I'd say you can measure distance a heck of a lot better than you can measure sound.
Well, that might be true.
And a preventative measure, having the distance versus trying to monitor that sound after it's done.
Well, actually, you can't even monitor the sound because the sound that we're talking about is so low. It all has to be calculated. There is no way to monitor it because you can't differentiate that sound down into the 20s. You can't differentiate the sound from the wind turbine to ambient sound. It's not physically possible. It's separated.
It's even hard to get ambient below 34, 33.
Right, it's difficult at best. So it's always a calculation, and that Danish scientist goes through quite an explanation on why that is the way it is and why that they selected the calculations, because they wanted to have a really low standard inside people's houses in the 20s, so clearly they had to come up with and they had done a bit of testing, so it'd be interesting, you know, if you read that article to see what your spin on that article was that Danish scientist wrote from the Danish EPA, because they actually just went through a huge rewrite in their sound regulations because of, you know, the issues that Paul is talking about. So it's a fresh experience.
Okay, I didn't look all of these up, but one of them that was interesting was Scotland. No, they don't require setbacks of at least 2 kilometers. It is a recommendation, although strongly recommended, and it is only from cities, towns, and villages. And in Scotland, that generally means 3,000 houses or individuals or more. They don't care about individuals out the countryside. In fact, many of theirs are built quite close to country areas.
One thing that is interesting, you know, that based on the readings I've done, is this comment from New Zealand. There definitely, in the literature, appears to be some discrepancies between, you know, the Australians and the New Zealanders for how they feel about it. Because if you see a majority of the Australian writing seems to be indicating there's not an issue, and the majority of the New Zealanders writing, if you look at kind of just taking the weight of the 2 piles, the New Zealanders have a different opinion. So it's kind of just interesting perspective. And then of course there's all, and we've read through, you know, a lot of this stuff in the past. Actually, some of the stuff is fairly familiar to us.
F and G are talking about mountainous terrain versus flat terrain and how it does make a big difference.
And that's what I asked Tesla when we had him on the Skype, and he kind of blew it off, but I grew up surrounded by ledges, and you down there with mountain ledges around here, the sound reverberates. I don't,
Well, I agree, and on one side, it does, but one thing, as far as the interesting point about what you're saying now is, so on the project that we looked at, a couple of years ago, a point of interest is the initial number came in to use that mid-range point that's selected by virtually all projects to calculate for hard surfaces and soft surfaces. And then at the meeting, it was determined, people were upset that it wasn't extreme enough. So then the discussion went to, okay, we'll calculate it for the hard surfaces, which is kind of more like what you're talking about, calculate the whole terrain thing and for hard surfaces. So then it was done that way. And then, hang on, so then after we did that, for hard surfaces, it was more compliant for hard surfaces than it was for medium surfaces. And then we went to court for information that we didn't even see, okay, before we made the decision. And the judge looked at soft surfaces on the complete opposite end of the extreme. So to me, what you're saying is you're concerned about the echoing effect off hard surfaces, and the judge took soft surfaces even though we never looked at soft surfaces.
well, it depended on whether you're trying to predict and profile the audible sound or the low frequency sound.
It's good. Well, to an extent, there is some validity to that, but certainly it's not at 1 or at 0. It's certainly something in the middle, whether it's 0.3 or 0.7. I don't know the exact answer. I'm not an acoustical engineer, but I think the average, anybody knows it's not 0 and it's not 1.
Well,
That's a no-brainer.
My point would be, we read a lot about studies in different places. I would say, you got to consider the terrain, and
The terrain is taken into account of the software that does the modeling. That's why you don't, if you look at the modeling software out in the Midwest, all the circles around the turbines form nice, smooth curves. And if you take a look at the one that was done for here, or for Stetson, or for other places, you've got all kinds of little pockets where it's quieter, noisier. That software takes into account that terrain.
And that's even more reason why one arbitrary 4,000 feet may be wonderful in one place and not so great in another.
Which is why we've concentrated on the noise. In fact, I'd like to take the 4,000 feet out and just concentrate on the sound. But now that we've got that standard in, heaven help us if we tried to take it out. Let's face it.
Well, yeah, there's other ways.
Can I ask why you guys
By the way,
put your setback from a residence and not from a property line? Because other setbacks in the land use ordinance, for instance, the adult businesses and other stuff, it's all from property lines. And I know you guys were looking at sensitive receptor sites, so you were looking at houses, but do you feel like our property, is
So
worth
let's just
protecting?
say, for instance, okay, if we were to set a really restrictive setback at a property line, for sound, okay, and say you can't have this much sound at a property line, and it was less than 4,000 feet or less than 5,000 feet or less than 5 kilometers or whatever, okay, would that be something that would be acceptable?
Well,
Because then the sound would
no,
go. Yeah, I know, but how come you're going with the distance and not the sound?
because the sound is harder to remedy after the fact. The setback is important because that's how you prepare. We don't want to be ending up in court 3 years from now because of violations to the sound. But if we follow recommended setbacks, we might be safer that way. And to me, it should be a setback from a property line, not someone's house.
even DEP doesn't use property lines on large parcels.
But the DEP gives 500 feet from a house, not 100 like you're proposing.
To me, it's just that when people own even large parcels, they have a
So
potential
you would be
vision
okay
for
with
that.
500 feet from a house?
No, I think it should be from
From
a
a
property
house?
line. And Bruce
Well, you
was-
just said that the DEP did.
I know, it's one of their more liberal.
Yes, but you also have to take a
Generally,
look at what they allow for the sound levels at that
Right,
500 feet.
right. You know,
So, which do you want? Do you want us to raise the sound levels, or do you want us to raise the distance?
No, I want
wanna protect-
you to look at property lines instead of just,
Okay, well, if we look at property lines and we focus on sound, how come that wouldn't be okay?
um,
What if we made it, I don't know, the calculated 20, would that be okay at a property line? I'm just saying.
But how do you know before the project goes up what the sound level will be at that property line?
I know, but I mean, I'm just saying, I mean, the emphasis seems to be the property line, so I'm trying to just figure out, you know, is it the property line or is it just trying to figure out how to like not have a project? You know, that's kind of
No.
that's what I feel.
I have a, you know, to me, this opens up the door to the future of, you know, projects coming to Clifton. And if we have a 4,000 foot setback, you know, it's quite possible that down the road a wind developer might come into, you know, in my backyard and their setback is my backyard. And to me, that deems that backyard, you know, no longer able to do what I plan to do with it or
What if the sound requirement is so strict that it doesn't matter?
But again, like I'm saying, it's harder to foresee if that will be a problem or not.
Okay,
until after the
if
project
we
is
put
built.
in like a huge, I don't know, apartment complex, the normal way, the big things that people can identify with that we've dealt with for decades, that's stormwater. That's the major issue. Okay, and so the stormwater rules indicate that you can't have any more stormwater coming off the site afterwards than you did before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, you know, would you be in here saying, well, I just need to have the distance from the nearest paved surface, you know, X amount of feet from my property line so I can be sure? Or would you take the engineer's calculations that there wouldn't be any water coming off the site?
I'm just worried about my property value in the future if someone else wanted
Well,
to
I'm
come
agreeing with you, so I'm just saying, if the water wasn't coming off the site, if the water stayed on the job site, which is what the state standard is, okay, or would you accept that the engineer said the water's going to stay on the job site, or would you fight that the water's going to come off the job site?
I honestly don't know.
Right, well, that's kind of where we are with this, because that's what the rules, mostly, no other rules are about distances, they're all about keeping the water on the site.
But again, like I said, it's kind of impossible to foresee what the sound level will be at my property line.
Well, what if the ambient sound, just as a for instance, if the ambient sound at the property line was 35 decibels,
Mm-hmm.
okay, because you went out and you measured the heck out of it, and you figured it's 35 decibels,
Yeah.
okay, on any given time. And then the calculations showed that it was only going to be, you know, that actually at the property line it would be 32 decibels or 31 decibels on a property line, you know, but the ambient sound's 35. So typically in any other development project, like if you look at any of these urban projects, if you're going to put in some kind of a business, typically you're allowed to have an increase in decibel level of 5 degrees for a shopping plaza, a sawmill, for, you know, a car wash. Okay, you would be allowed to go up 5 decibels over whatever the ambient was. So if we said that you can't, not only can you not go up 5 decibels, but you have to keep it at whatever it is at the beginning on a person's property line, and then the calculation showed it would be 32, but it was not 4,000 feet or a mile or 5 miles or whatever, would you accept that?
No, because I don't think there's any way to foresee.
Right, well see,
it.
that's kind of where we are with this, because you're basically just said that you wouldn't accept a professional calculation for this,
A prediction.
for a prediction, even if you would accept it for and it's been accepted for decades for water, you're just saying you wouldn't follow that pattern.
It's a lot different than water, though. You're talking about not just a sound or a noise, but this is a very annoying noise to people.
How about cars and trucks?
It's a very different
The
sound.
two of you live on Route 9,
Mm-hmm.
which the DOT has measured traffic, cars and trucks, logging trucks, gravel trucks, at 5,000 vehicle passages a day.
Mm-hmm.
okay,
That's roughly 1 every 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Every time one of those passes by, I guarantee you it exceeds 75 decibels.
It's
well,
a different
the
So
trucks
if you
are
apply-
more than the-
If you apply a limit of ambient measurement of, say, 30 decibels to man-made intrusions in your piece,
Mhm.
then you have to close down Route 9.
No, it's not just the sound. It's the whole.
ISO
impact of that in my backyard.
1971 does not exist.
Yeah.
But
Cars
it's
and
a
trucks
different. But it
impacting
is a
your
different
backyard.
sound. Bruce also mentioned that the sound of the ocean violates sound ordinances, but the sound of the ocean is actually a different sound than the whooshing of a windmill.
Cars and trucks
I'd like
don't
to
whoosh.
put in one more.
That's all right, we're going to just have to move on. I'm just trying to,
Not leave behind
Go ahead,
on
Paul.
the property line thing. I feel like it is very unfair to have a person's property divided between two sound standards on their property. Their whole property should be under one sound standard. And to imagine that you're going to measure 125 feet from somebody's house and say, that's okay, because that's 40 there, but it has to be 35 near it. I don't know what you've got now.
You just got done telling me you wouldn't accept one sound standard on a property. Because if I said, if we made a sound standard for a property line, that wouldn't be good enough. You said it has to be your sound standard. And your sound standard is no sound standard, it's a distance standard.
I'm saying it should be one sound standard.
Okay, so if we
for the
made so you
whole
couldn't emit more than so much calculated over a property line, you said you wouldn't accept that.
Not me, I didn't say nothing like that.
Yeah, you did. You said it needs to be a distance.
I
You
think,
both said it needs to be a distance.
I think you should have
But I
both.
think it should be a distance to people's property line. That's the way I.
Right, so if it was,
I think it's unfair to say half of your property can be subjected to more sound than the other half.
okay, well then it should be 5 decibels more.
You know,
On the whole
whatever
property.
you guys want to say it, and it goes to all the property line, then we could say, well, we don't think that's the right one, or whatever. But I think it's inherently unfair to a property owner to have a standard that,
Basically, we could go the way you're talking about it, I'm not saying we should do this, but the way you're talking about it, we could actually end up with a sound standard following your kind of line of reasoning that would be in line with lots of communities, but it would be much louder allowable noise and allowable sound than it is now, listening to the way you're describing this. Just saying.
Well,
I don't think that's the way she was saying it.
No.
Well, I know that's
We're trying to protect the
That would be
property
the outcome.
owners.
I'm saying.
Okay.
It would be the outcome of an unintended consequence. That's what it is I'm trying to tell
If
you.
you're gonna say it.
Unintended consequence of following down the path that you're on could be a more permissible sound
How did
standard.
that happen?
I don't see how that.
Because
Let me ask you, what is the important part of the sound standard? Isn't it for the health of the people?
Yeah.
Fine. So, the major problem with sound is sleep disturbance, correct?
Well, I might, as being somebody who suffers from Meniere's disease, I would say there's also a strong vestibular disturbance component there.
Yeah, but, okay, we can't, nobody can write an ordinance that takes into account people that have various
Well,
problems
they can.
completely. Well, not unless you want to tell everybody to ban everything.
No, I'm
But
saying
the
how many
reality
people
is, the
do you want?
majority of people, the real question is, those effects due to lack of sleep. Those are attributed to loud sounds. Now, even WHO says inside a bedroom, 30 dBA is, and they are overly strict, quite frankly. I mean, I sleep in a room that has 40 dBA every night. Most people here, if you actually put a sound meter in their room, will be over the 30.
goes
But-
left and right.
So they say 30. If you've got 35 dBA at 100 feet from a person's residence, on average, for the sounds that you hear, dBA, there is 10 to 15, it's usually given as 15, but let's take a more conservative one, 10 decibel lowering of the sound going into the house. That's with a window cracked open, and that's the WHO's own calculations. So what we're saying, if it's at 35 outside of that residence, we're guaranteeing you 25 in your bedrooms, in effect. There should be no problems with people having health problems. And that is what this is all about.
I truly hope so, because if there are problems, it's going to be a lot harder to remedy them after the fact.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
What Bruce was just talking about was DBA, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
dBA.
But it's been in most of the health studies that it's the low frequency that has been bothering people. That is harder to measure.
And almost all of those people complaining have been at distances way under 4,000 feet.
But not
Almost all, but not
Almost.
everyone.
That's right, and just like you have Meniere's disease, and I knew somebody else that had it as well, if they get in certain situations, it triggers it. You have no control over it. You cannot protect absolutely everybody from absolutely everything.
But
But
we
I
try
do-
our best to protect as many
But
people as
who
possible.
are you
I-
going to decide to throw under the bus? So which people are you ready to throw under the bus?
Well,
You
they're
know,
willing to
this
throw
is the
me
thing,
under
okay,
the bus when I
now,
go to the road.
we're gonna work on the ordinance, but just as kind of, you know, yeah, I'm not even gonna answer that.
Yeah?
Because, well, okay, no, actually, I
now
will,
what
because you know what,
kind of
because what
decision?
you're saying, you're actually indicating that, you're saying that there's a certainty that a particular party or person or a group of people will definitely have a problem, you know, just hang on, if you put up a project. But you're also saying, you know, and we're saying, well, there's a certainty that the decibels won't be at a range that it will cause a problem. And you're questioning, you're saying, well, no, you can't have that certainty. You have to go out this distance so I can have my certainty. But you're telling me that yours, if we don't do it, you're saying that yours is a certainty. You're not even,
No, I'm
you're not acknowledging that there's uncertainty on both sides.
I'm saying, in my mind, that between 4,000 feet and a mile, there is so much uncertainty that I'd rather err in the favor of going the mile than the 4,000 feet.
We're gonna just, that's a philosophical discussion, so let's work on the ordinance right now, and then we can come back to that at a different time and answer those maybe in a little bit more detail. So Bruce, I think on the specific standards for the sound, I think we had kind of, this is what we had discussed last time. Now, what's this here that you wrote in? I didn't really track that part.
Well, there was not anything in here about actual enforcement and the procedure to enforce.
Okay.
And people here have been concerned that there was not enough teeth in the ordinance. Well, you need an actual...
Okay, well, I guess my question here, Bruce, was more to the point of, and that's why I made that big comment, and I don't know if you deleted the big comment or not. I tried to look for it.
Big comment.
I made a comment that, because my concern was, it's very difficult still to follow this thing and separate out what is the submission requirement and what is the operational requirement. So to me, when I saw this in here, I got really confused again.
They're the same.
Well, they're not the same.
Submission requirement is the studies,
Right?
but the studies have to say that the operation, say they're going to pass the operational
Right.
requirement, but that
Right,
is
but
the operational requirement.
Well, you can't, the operational requirement, in my view anyway, should be in the operational permit portion, because you have, so it's just difficult, okay, it's saying submit.
All you're gonna do is copy that over then.
Okay, well, the code enforcement officer isn't gonna go issue a person an NOV, okay, for some, in here, for this, not having the submission requirement.
No,
That's what that says.
no, these are the sound standards, period. And then when you're talking about the submission requirements, which are above,
Okay, maybe
the submission requirements say you have to meet those sound standards when you do your sound study. The standards are the standards, period. Your submission requirements are the proof that ahead of time that you are going to be able to comply as part of, and that's what the whole pre-application sound study is for.
Right, so, submit this stuff. So we move the definitions out, that's why all those are crossed out.
Well, a lot of those are the submission requirements are moved to Chapter 6. Article 6.
See, this is one of my problems with the current ordinance, is it's so difficult to follow, you know, and make sure that the squares are filled. And one thing I don't want to ever happen again on these damn projects, whether it's this one or anything else, is to not be able to figure out where the friggin' submittals are and not be able to have a conversation with somebody that walks in that door and tell them, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And this mixing and matching, it just makes it confusing and also makes it so that it exposes us to a lot more liability than we need. So, I mean, that's one of my major concerns on how this whole thing was written in the first place. Because I didn't really, you know, probably like Paula said, Paula, you know, did warn us that we should have gone through it before we did it, and we didn't really go through it and have like a model because we got crunched in for time with all kinds of other arguments over a lot of other issues, and we never modeled a person coming in the door and walking through and actually executing. So, you know, then when Paul came in with that project, we tried to tell Paul what he needed to do. You know, it was not that entertaining for me, just to say the least. And I'm just concerned that that's where we still are. You know, and so see, they'll reference the submittals again.
Yep,
And then there's a study.
there's your
And
study.
there's a study.
Yep.
And then here's all of a sudden a standard.
And those are the standards. Yeah, those are the standards.
Wouldn't it make sense to put the standards up front and maybe have a checklist?
That's what I'm thinking, something like that.
The standards are the standards. I mean, you can move them around in the ordinance. What it amounts to is you still just have a section that says standards. You know, if you want to move them to a
It
different
seems like a
section.
project though. I don't know.
I
It's
really
more
don't
like a
care
punch
where they
list
are.
kind of thing is,
Well, the punch list is your Article 6 and the additional ones in there. The standards are really strictly to do with compliance after it's built. And the only other thing the standards come in on is that we are requiring, before it's built, a sound study to show that they're going to comply with those standards afterwards. Now, just in case, because most large projects, where you were building the, the power plant there in VZ or whatever, afterwards you come back and you actually verify that they meet those standards. That's what the second sound study is, and one every 5 years thereafter. If we have complaints, we may have to do something in between. Your sound standards are the compliance standards after it's built. The only difference is you've got a sound study ahead of time to show that you are going to be able to comply. And since nothing is perfect, that's why you require another sound study after it's built to show that you are compliant. And if you're not, you have to fix it.
or you lose your operating permit.
When you
Or
lose
it's
your
suspended,
operating
Right, or
permit,
whatever.
you've got a short time in order to make corrections. Or you lose your operating permit. You lose your operating permit, you get a legal order to shut down. Seeing as how expensive that would be, most people are gonna take a lot of effort on making corrections. It would be no different than if somebody put in a gravel pit somewhere.
Okay, what about, all right, I mean, we probably should need to spend a little bit more time trying to organize that. You know, I kind of, in a little bit with what you're saying, you know, I just want to make sure that it can be followed. So then we,
Well, your biggest problem right now for following it is all of the markups that are in there. If you took all those markups out, made just a copy minus all the stuff that's been deleted and
just
everything.
put it as a simple markup, and they just,